So now we're on Daf Kuf Vav Omid Beis, and now we introduce what would probably be the most stringent or the most chamerdika washing of one's hands, which would be the Kohen before he does the avoda, and that's called Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. He goes into the kiyar, and the water was collected in the kiyar, and he opens the spout, and we'll see exactly how you do this because you need what's called kol kavra. But in any event, he's got to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Now you might think that Ada Perek, which we discussed on Omen Aleph, that's okay for Chullin and even for Truma. But when you're dealing with a machshir to set up the validity of the Kohen to do the avoda, here we have to upgrade it. It have to be more machmir. No, the Brisa records that Ada Perek. That's enough. Ada Perek. Which means that you don't even have to wash to the knuckles, and certainly not to the wrist. So that's the ratio of this brisa. And now we get to the sefer of the brisa. The sefer of the brisa moves on to a slightly different avenue, and that is the laws of chatzitza. Now, if a person contracts tumas haguf, he's got to jump into the mikveh to be mitayr himself, and there cannot be any chatzitza. Let's say, for example, here where I am now in Ramat Beit Shemesh, it's a construction zone, and if you walk out of here, you get all sorts of things on your body, unless you're very well clothed, clay and dust and what have you. Any of those foreign objects will cause, interesting, the English, which I'm not familiar with, interposition, which is called a chatzitza, separating his body from the mayim. So his entire body has to be in contact with the mayim. That's tvila. What about netila? And when we talk about netila, we could talk about 1, 2, 3. Number 1, netilas yadayim, to wash your hands before you eat bread of chulin. Number 2, you could talk about netila for truma. And number 3, you could talk about kiddush yadayim v'raglayim of a kohen. So now we're talking about a tvila of one part of the body. Says the brisa in the sefer, kol davar shechotzes b'tvilas haguf, chotzetz b'netilas yadayim, l'chulin, l'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim b'mikdash. The same requirements, that there's got to be direct contact with the water, without any interposition, without any chatzitza, that applies to tvilas haguf, when the entire guf is tamei and you go into the mikveh. Apply those rules of chatzitza, the psul of chatzitza, which invalidates, the tefillah will invalidate netilas yadayim, and also kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So he writes here, if any substance is found upon his hand or his hands, if it covers the majority of his hand, or even if it covers the minority of his hand, so like, let's say, for example, he has some sticky clay, it's attached to a small part of his hands, let's say to his, the palm, to his thumb or something. And of course, he wants to remove it. He doesn't walk around for the rest of his life with clay attached to his hands. And that makes it objectionable. Which is called in the lashon of the Shas makpid. So you could have rov she'eno makpid or miut hamakpid. In any of those cases, if you checked off any of those boxes, then it's a chatzitza. For sure, if it covers most of your hand, you've got the sticky clay all over your hand. And even if it's only covering part of your head, but you object to it, meaning you're makpid, you want to get rid of it. And this chatzitza is a posel to invalidate both Netilas Yadayim L'Chulin and Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And the paradigm is anything that would be a chatzitza for Tvilas Gufo in a mikveh. But if you notice, the Brisa doesn't add the word truma over here. It's sort of left the excluded middle. You've got Netilas Yadayim for Chulin. You've got Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for the Kohen in the Avodah Beis HaMikdash. What about truma? Amar Rav, ad kan lechulin, ad kan letruma. There's no difference between chulin and truma. Now he's going back to the reisha of the brisa. You remember that the subject of the reisha of the brisa is how much of your hand do you have to wash? And Rav says that there's an absolute equation between washing for chulin and washing for truma. And it goes only up to the second finger joint. But, the language here is a little bit strange. It says, like Rav was pointing ad kan lechulin, and then he said ad kan letruma. It sounds like he was pointing to a different part of his hand when he got to truma, which would mean that Rav holds that in the case of truma, it's not sufficient that you go up to the second joint, but you have to go up to the knuckle. So for a minute here, I'll read to you Rashi's, in English, Rashi says, Rav pointed to his second finger joint and said that one must wash up to here, ad kan lechulin, and then he pointed to his knuckles and said ad kan letruma. So then Rav now makes sense if we read the brisa, and we're going to say that the brisa is separated between chulin and truma. But what's very strange is that in both cases, Chulin and Truma, the Brisa used the word perek, ada perek. Shmuel Omar ad kan bein lechulin, bein lechumra, bein letruma. Okay, so Shmuel is now assuming in the Brisa that the exact part of the hand that has to be washed is both for Chulin and for Truma. No difference between the two, which is the way we want to interpret the Brisa ada perek. But in which direction is he going? L'kula or l'chumra? So that's going to be a machlokas between Shmuel and Rav Sheshes. Why? Because Shmuel is going l'chumra. And it means that Shmuel, pointed, let's say, to his knuckles. Let's argue for a moment. And he said that's what you need for both Truma and Chulin. So Shmuel is accomplishing two goals in his argument against Rav. Number one, he's not willing to accept a difference between Chulin and Truma, but rather against Rav, he equates the two. And further than that, he now upgrades Chulin with a Chumrah to the level of, wash until your knuckles like you do for Truma. Rav Sheshes Omar, Ad kan bein Chulin bein Truma l'kula. In other words, on the one hand, Rav Sheshes accepts the equation of Shmuel against Rav between Chulin and Truma, but not the way Shmuel says l'chumra, to take me all the way up to my knuckles, but rather l'kula to the second joint. And that's okay even for Truma. Omar bar Hadya, Havi Koim Nekami de Rav Ami, V'Omar Ad Kan Bein lechulin, bein letruma. Okay, fine, he's equating truma and chulin as far as the requirement of netila, but in which direction? Lechumra, up to the knuckles, which means that he's accepting Shmuel. V'lo tema Rabbi Ami mishum the maybe Rav Ami was more machmir because he always had to worry about truma, and even when he was eating chulin, he wasn't always, aware of whether he's eating chulin or truma because he was a Kohen and he ate truma all the time. But maybe as far as others, even Rabbi Ami would confess, would concede that all you need for chulin is on a parak. You mean the second joint. Daha, so don't accept that shot. Daha Rabbi Maisha bar Bereid Rav Yeshua ben Levi hu lavoi. He was a Levi, and the Levi doesn't eat truma. And V'yomer, nevertheless, he said, Ad kan ben chulin ben truma l'chumra. So he went l'chumra, like Shmuel, but not because he was a Kohen. He was not a Kohen. In Rav Ami, when you want to say that he was machmir, maybe he was only machmir because he was a Kohen. But now in Rav Miyasha, we see that even a Levi who doesn't eat truma, nevertheless they accepted the shita of Shmuel. Okay, we don't have that much time, but I would like to mention that the poskim here, lahalacha lemaisa, seem to assume that we're going to be machmir in chulin like Rav Miyasha, the same way we're going to be machmir in truma, but that only goes up to the second joint. The problem is, and you and I know that we wash to the knuckles, that's even on Tisha B'Av, that's because of the Shitas HaRif. The Rif had a different girsa in our sugya, and it comes out according to the Rif's girsa that both Shmuel, Ravi Ami, and Rav Miyasha all demonstrated, when they said Ad Kan, that he had to wash his hands all the way up to the wrist. And the Shulchan Aruch is going to paskin that we have to machmir like the Rif, who had a different girsa than the sugya that we just learned, in which case you have to wash your hands even for chulin, certainly for truma, and how much more so for kiddush yadayim raglayim, all the way up to the wrist. Omar Rav, and with this we'll wrap it up for today. Notel odom shtei yodav shachris umasna lehem kol yom kula. Wow. If we're worried about your hands coming in contact with tumah, and that's why we instituted the requirement in Tilas Yadayim, what happens if you can guarantee me that for the course of the entire day, you didn't have any contact with tumah? Which means that you were very meticulous about watching and guarding your hands. So when you woke up in the morning, because at nighttime, Yadayim Askani, you're saying you don't know what you touched, but you would notel Yadav in the morning, and for the rest of the day, you were very meticulous. Rav says that's okay. You don't have to wash your hands over and over again. So you washed your hands once, and it covers you for the entire day. And here the Rashba, one of the great Rishonim, is bothered by the fact that why masna lehem? If you're telling me that since he knows for sure he didn't have any contact with tumah, therefore he doesn't need another Tilas Yadayim, why did you have to make this tznai? You have to get up and make a stipulation, make a declaration that I'm washing today for the entire day. And the Rashba introduces a whole new concept here that Netilas Yadayim requires kavana. And the kavana could be either for this particular achila that I'm about to eat bread now, or the kavana could be even for another achila. And therefore, I need a t'nai in order to expand my kavana of netila to include all the bread that I eat during the course of the day for all the meals. Amar lahu Rabbi Avina. And here we turn to Daf Libnei Pitkat. Now there's a place called Aravos. And in that place of Aravos, they had a very scarce supply of water. And therefore he said, I tell people like you who have such a limited access to the limited volume of water, lo shchichi lehumaya, you don't have too much water, is mashvi yadai mitzafra, you should rely on Rav and wash your hands once in the morning. The asnu, make a t'nai, alayu l'kuliyom, that it should suffice for the entire day. And here, the Gemara wants to know what was the nature of that psak of Rav Avina. Was it Ikadiyam according to one opinion, it was Shasat Chak in, but Shalom Shasat Chak low. So if you're in a place where there's a great access and volume to water, you cannot make this condition and say, well, I'm going to wash once in the morning for the entire day. Upliga de Rav, or Ikadiyam Shalom Shasat Chak Nami, Vahainu de Rav. Because Rav didn't say that this was only, there's a pressing need because there's not enough water. Rav made a general statement that a person could make this Tanai, even Lechatchila, and according to the second version, the Ika Amri of the story of Ravina, is Ravina had in mind in general, even Shalom B'Shasadcha. And this leads us to Omar Rav Papa, which Amir Hashem, the Lineder we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay, then. So let me wish you Chodesh Tov, and we'll see each other tomorrow. Mitzvah Hashem. Tomorrow we get together. Rosh Chodesh. All right, I think it should work out for 9:30. I hope so.